Welcome to the deep dive. Today we have a really interesting one. You sent in a dialogue for English language learners.
Oh, cool.
And we're going to kind of go beyond just the vocabulary today and unearth all the little cultural hints and,
Right.
storytelling choices that the writers made, and maybe even a few chills along the way.
I love it. It's amazing how, these simple language lessons can sometimes tap into those universal fears we all share.
Exactly. So this dialogue is about these two housewives who are gossiping about their mysterious new neighbor, Armand.
Okay.
It's intended for upper intermediate learners, so the vocabulary is pretty robust.
Yeah.
But what I thought was so intriguing was how they use those words to really build suspense.
Oh, absolutely. I think one of those interesting things about this is that they're playing with our expectations.
Yeah.
A phrase like housewarming gift usually has such positive connotations. You're welcoming someone into the community.
Right.
But in this context, knowing that it involves Armand, it almost becomes like a warning.
Yeah, like a red flag.
Yeah.
Totally. And speaking of word choices, one that really stood out to me was weird.
Yeah.
It's such a simple word.
Right.
But it can have so many different shades of meaning.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's a really great example of how, one word can change everything.
Totally.
And weird in this case isn't just unusual, it's unsettling.
Right.
Imagine if they had used a word like odd or peculiar.
Totally.
It would be a much lighter, almost whimsical story.
Yeah, it would.
But weird sets this darker, more suspicious tone.
100%. And it also, I think, cleverly mirrors how the housewives are feeling about Armand.
Exactly.
We haven't even met him yet, but they're already feeling uneasy.
Like the dialogue has planted that seed.
Totally. So we've got these curious housewives. We've got this creepy new neighbor.
Yeah.
And we have this word choice that's already...
It's already amping up the tension.
Yeah. Yes. So what happens next? Well, the dialogue kind of takes us on this scavenger hunt.
Okay.
As the housewives are trying to piece together clues about Armand.
Interesting.
And this is where I think the writers get really crafty with the use of sensory details.
Oh, yeah.
We hear about the constant darkness inside of his house and a mysterious box that was delivered that's described as coffin-like.
Oh, spooky.
I know. I love it. It's like they're painting this picture of creepiness just with words.
Yeah, engaging our imagination.
Totally.
Great.
When I read that, I was like, what is in that box? It's such a small detail, but it sparks all these unsettling possibilities.
Yeah, and it makes you think about, the bigger picture of how our brains work.
Right.
We tend to fill in the blanks.
We did.
When we're faced with the unknown.
Especially when it's a little bit scary.
Especially when it's scary or we don't really know what's going on.
We're primed to kind of see the worst.
Yeah. And the dialogue plays into that.
Yes, it does. So it's not just about these sensory details, though, right?
Yeah.
There are some really powerful phrases that they use that describe how these housewives are feeling. One that comes to mind is, I've got a bad feeling about this, or I've got a bad feeling about him.
That's such an interesting phrase.
Yeah.
Because it taps into something beyond logic or evidence.
Yeah.
It's like intuition.
Exactly.
That gut feeling.
Yes. Have you ever had that?
All the time.
Oh my gosh, me too.
Where it's just something's not right.
Totally.
And you can't explain it.
And the dialogue uses a bunch of other phrases too, like creeped me out or scared the heck out of me.
Right, right.
That really emphasize the emotional impact.
I think that's important.
Yeah.
Because, it goes beyond just the facts of this happened.
Right.
It brings the reader into the story.
Yes.
And allows them to experience that.
With the characters.
That fear and that anxiety with the characters.
And because those are such common expressions, it makes it relatable no matter where you're from.
Yes. Regardless of your background.
And just when the suspense has kind of reached its peak, the dialogue throws in this twist.
Ooh, I love a good twist.
We finally hear Armand's voice for the first time, and it's so sudden.
Wow.
It startles the gossiping housewives.
It's like they were trying to manifest him.
I know.
By talking about him.
I know.
And then all of a sudden, there he is.
It's brilliant the way they subvert expectations.
Yeah.
We've been building this image of him in our minds based on, what other people have said and these little details, and then bam!
Yeah, you're confronted with the possibility that you might have been wrong.
Or right. We don't know.
Or right.
The dialogue leaves it totally ambiguous.
I love that.
Like the writers are saying, okay, we've given you all the clues.
Right.
Now what do you think?
What do you think?
And I think that's a great way to encourage critical thinking.
Absolutely.
Because it invites the reader or the listener to question their own assumptions. Yes.
Consider different perspectives.
Right.
And even question like the reliability of the housewives.
Being truthful.
Exactly. So we've gone from vocabulary to suspense building to this emotional resonance.
Right.
And now we're kind of questioning the story itself.
I love it.
I mean, this dialogue packs a punch.
It really does. And I think what's really amazing is that we haven't even touched on the deeper themes that are just below the surface.
This is true.
You know, it's not just a creepy neighbor story.
Yeah.
This is about human nature.
It is.
This is about how we interact with the world around us.
Yeah, and that's where it gets really interesting because it's not just about learning English anymore.
Exactly.
It's about exploring these universal human experiences.
I love it.
That transcend language and culture.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to dive into next.
Yes.
How this dialogue subtly touches upon themes of fear, prejudice, and the stories we tell ourselves.
To make sense of the unknown.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome.
Sounds good.
Well, let's take a quick break and then we'll be right back.
It's fascinating how this dialogue, you know, while it was meant for language learning, it almost acts as like a social experiment.
Oh, interesting.
It presents us with this figure Armand, and then we kind of have to like fill in the blanks.
And it makes you realize how often we do that in real life.
Yeah.
You meet someone new, you pick up a few details, maybe overhear some gossip.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you've created this whole narrative about who they are.
Absolutely. And I think that narrative is often shaped by our own experiences and biases.
Of course.
And, you know, let's be honest, a little bit of fear of the unknown.
Yeah. A healthy dose.
Yeah.
And these housewives seem so quick to jump to the conclusion that Armand is weird and suspicious.
Is he really that strange, or are they just uncomfortable with someone who doesn't fit their mold? Yeah, and I think that's a great point because it brings us to this idea of prejudice. Yeah. You know, as listeners, we're put in the same position as these housewives.
We have limited information.
Yes.
And we're prompted to make judgments based on that.
Exactly. And the writers are kind of holding up a mirror to us in a way.
Oh, for sure.
Like, look at how quick you are to categorize people based on...
Yeah, and to categorize them based on like really superficial observations.
Exactly.
Sometimes.
So is Armand actually this creepy figure that they think he is, or is he just a misunderstood outsider?
Yeah.
There's that one part in the dialogue where one of the housewives goes to visit his house.
Okay, yeah.
And she's like, it was so dark inside, I felt like I was in a cave.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And that line just always stood out to me.
I see that.
Because I think it says so much about how our own emotions can really affect how we see things.
It's so true. It could just be that, you know, he likes dim lighting. But because she's afraid, it becomes symbolic of something more sinister.
It's like that saying, we see the world not as it is, but as we are.
Yes.
Right? Our anxieties and preconceptions can really distort how we see other people.
100%. I mean, the housewives gossip, their focus on the coffin-like box, their fear, it all contributes to this narrative. I could be
totally wrong.
Totally wrong.
And what's so interesting is that they never confirm or deny our suspicions.
They leave us hanging.
Yeah. What if he's just an eccentric artist?
Exactly.
Or recluse?
Right. What if he just...
with a really tragic past?
Yeah. What if he just wants to be left alone?
We don't know.
We don't know. And I think that ambiguity is what makes it so brilliant.
It does.
Because it forces us to consider different interpretations.
Okay.
You know, there's always more to the story.
There is.
Than meets the eye.
It meets the eye.
And I think it encourages us to, you know, approach the unknown with curiosity rather than judgment.
Yeah, I like that.
You know,
it's a good reminder that sometimes the stories that we tell ourselves can be just as revealing about us as they are about the people we're talking about.
And that, I think, is where this kind of transcends its purpose as just a language lesson.
It does.
And becomes a commentary on, like, the human condition.
I love that.
You know?
Yeah.
It's about how we see each other. The power of gossip.
The power of fear.
The power of fear.
Yeah.
And, You know how important it is to question our assumptions.
I mean, it's amazing how much they packed into this short little dialogue.
It's less than a page long, and look at all this.
I know, it's so well crafted.
It really is. Yeah. It just shows that language is not just about communication.
Right.
It's about, shaping perceptions, exploring complex themes, and, sparking these interesting discussions.
Yeah. So we've analyzed the vocabulary, the suspense, the emotional resonance.
Yeah.
And now we've kind of delved into these deeper themes.
Right. What else is there?
What else is there to uncover?
Well, there's one final aspect I want to touch upon.
Okay.
And that's humor.
Okay.
Because even though we're dealing with some pretty dark themes like fear and prejudice,
right,
it still maintains this playfulness
that
prevents it from becoming too heavy-handed.
Yeah, there's a lightness to it.
Right.
There's a wink at the audience almost.
Yeah. And I think that humor is really important.
Yeah.
Because it makes us more receptive
to the message.
To that underlying message.
Right.
And,
it makes us laugh at ourselves a little bit.
Yeah. It allows us to kind of laugh at ourselves and our tendencies to jump to conclusions.
Yeah. It's like they know how ridiculous it is that we're turning this guy into a monster.
Yeah.
Based on nothing.
Based on whispers and shadows.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that humor lets us kind of look at these darker themes, like the fear and the prejudice, without feeling like we're being preached at.
Absolutely.
I actually laughed out loud when the one housewife said,
"Oh, yeah.
He probably has a dungeon under his house full of kidnapped squirrels."
That's my favorite line.
It's so good.
I love that one.
Obviously, she's exaggerating.
Right.
But it shows how our imaginations can just go wild when we get suspicious.
Especially when you add a little bit of fear in there.
Exactly. It's that perfect blend of genuine unease.
Yeah.
But also they're winking at us.
Right. They're in on the joke.
Knowing that they're being a little ridiculous.
Yes. And I think that self-awareness is what makes this such a valuable learning experience.
Because it's not just about grammar.
Right.
It's about understanding people, how we communicate.
It's about the human element of communication.
Exactly. So as we wrap up our deep dive today, what are some key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, I think first it highlights just how important word choice is.
Right.
Like swapping out weird for
odd.
Odd.
Totally changes the story.
Totally changes the story.
And second, I think it reminds us that using sensory details is such a good way to pull the reader in.
And to build that suspense.
Exactly. And maybe most importantly, it reminds us to be aware of the stories we tell ourselves about other people.
Yes. Question those assumptions.
Question our assumptions and be curious instead of fearful.
Exactly.
I like that. So it seems this dialogue meant for English language learners has actually given us all a lesson in being human.
Absolutely.
And I think that's beautiful.
And who knows, maybe someday our listener will encounter their own Armand.
Oh, that's a good point.
Someone who challenges their perceptions.
Right.
And prompts them to look beyond the surface.
I hope they remember this conversation and approach that situation with an open mind and a little bit of curiosity.
Because sometimes the most weird
or odd people are actually the most fascinating.
Once we get to know them.
Exactly. Well, the world is full of stories.
It is.
Waiting to be discovered.
Yes.
And learning a language is the key.
It's like a magic key.
To unlock all those stories.
I love that.
Well, that's it for today.
Okay.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.